been a quiet group. A lot of folks still on, so that's great. I wanted to just take a little bit of time and, like we always do on these, and give a bit of a snapshot as to what's new and what's coming down the immediate pipeline. Obviously, we don't have enough time to get through everything that's new, so I'll make sure I provide a lot of links where you guys can keep up to date with what's new. Lot of really exciting things on the roadmap, both with Power BI and Power Platform. So really excited to see that. From a acknowledging the new normal, I think Jared touched into this. I also have 3 little ones at home. I'm hoping none of them storm the office here. They've been instructed not to. But you know, and I think most of you probably remember this clip on CNN of the poor guy at his infant's bomb into the background. But you know, if he was using Microsoft Teams at the time, he'd be able to blur his background and it would be a non-issue. So hopefully I don't have any of the similar issues that he had today. But just getting back to the updates, these are links. Don't have to write them down. Don't have to take snapshots. You guys will have the deck here. The blog is really well kept up to date. So any new features that come out in all of our Power Platform will get updates on this blog. The product team stays on top of it. So from the Power BI release blog, Power Apps has the release blog, and then Power Automate, obviously. I noticed they haven't renamed the URL, the Power Automate from Flow. But that's there as well. And then there's a new site, this 2020 releases and planned features. So we broke 2020 up into 2 halves. So the first half and the second half. And we've set a bunch of roadmap items that we're going to let people know, 3 to 6 months out from when some of these new features are coming. Really exciting. I will say that some of the COVID challenges that are ongoing, we've diverted some of our developer resources into that area. So there may be some delays, a couple months on some of these features, going from preview to generally available, but nonetheless, we'll jump right into it. And so these were 10. Honestly, there was probably about 40 that I thought were really interesting. Chris only gives me half an hour, so I got to be really quick. And I thought these were relevant with customers that I'm working with, and kind of what some of them are just things that I've been looking for from Power BI for in some cases, a couple of years now. And all of these are hot linked. So in the deck, you'll have a URL that will take you to a page that has a description and details on all of these. So some of them will blast through, but you'll have all this info. The asterisk are ones that have premium features. So Reza mentioned that some of these cool new features do require premium. What I will say about that is that that changes. So oftentimes we've released functionality in premium, and that has sat in premium for a period of time, and then we've rolled that out into Pro, just to our generic capacity. So just because they're slotted into premium now does not mean that they'll stay there. So the first one, which I'm really, really excited about, and for those of you, and Reza, I'm glad Reza kind of prefaced some of this, so it's a little bit of overlap from what he talked about, but not really. He was talking about some of the challenges we have with self-service tools, and that is, I build a model, I build a dashboard, I publish it, and all of that hard work and energy kind of gets locked into the PBIX file that I'm working with. So I can't have colleagues or other people collaborating where I may build some and then some other developers building some other stuff to it, and we're collaborating and we're building on top of what we're doing. It's more of, in the self-service world, it's more of, okay, send me your PBIX file, I'll dissect it, and I'll pull the guts out of what I think's useful in the model that I'm building. And so that model or that operating method is changing, which is super exciting, and it's overlapping with what we've done for a long time, kind of in the business intelligence space, and that is, let's have centralized models that are highly governed, that have multiple authors, that have a proper CI/CD pipeline and path around change management, and any kind of continuous development that's ongoing. And so what we've done with these XMLA endpoints, and I'll show you what those are for those of you that aren't familiar, what the heck an XML endpoint is essentially the same construct that we used to get with analysis services. And so analysis services was that IT's building models that then get published and the business can consume them. And then Power BI came out and said, well, now the business can build their own models and they can publish them and consume them. And those two worlds are coming together. And we're saying now we have the capabilities of, sure, Power BI is a self-service tool and you can do all that great stuff. But we also want those governance and really traditional IT capabilities around change control and things like that built into those models for those models that want to be shared out to broader audiences within the organization. So now when we publish a model into Power BI, what we're doing is we are actually, and what I'll do is I will pull up an example. It's easier to walk through that way. We are actually publishing a separate model. And sorry, does someone have a question?
Is now exiting.
Okay. And Reza had mentioned, he talked into this a little bit, and I'm just going to, and I apologize, I think everyone's so sick of COVID-19, but it was a data set that I had up and was working with. So I thought, let's just piggyback off of that. And so let's say we're building this dashboard and report. We go to publish it. So I'm going to publish it. I hit publish. It's going to ask me to log in if I'm not already logged in. I can set a destination, and I hit select, and it publishes it up to Power BI portal. And so if I open up the Power BI portal, and I look at my workspaces, and so I have a workspace Becker demo, and it's obviously backed by premium capacity, hence the diamond here. And I'll be able to see both the data set and the report that model, that Power BI dashboard was published. So we are separating the dashboard from the model itself. So what we can do when we look at this workspace, and Reza had popped this up open too, was that we have this workspace connection. And what we're essentially doing is now we're saying Power BI is acting like analysis services in the sense that I can now publish Power BI file up to the service, splits the visualization component from the modeling component, and then I can take any tool I want. And in Reza's example, it was Tableau. And he took Tableau and said, I'm going to take Tableau and I'm going to connect to this and I'm going to build a subsequent dashboard and model on top of it. So what I could do is I could take a completely blank Power BI file. I could say get data. I could say I'm going to connect. In this case, it's actually analysis services. I could say a Power BI data set, right? Because we do support just connecting straight up to those Power BI data sets. Let's go through this as connecting to analysis services. I believe I copied that. If not, I have it here. We'll put that same, so this is that same workspace URL that we had identified here. So this is that same workspace connection that we're putting in. And so what I can do is I'm going to do a live connect to it. And this would be the same way as if you were doing it with something like Tableau or Excel or any other visualization tool that supports analysis services, which I think most any BI tool out there would support an analysis services connection. I'm going to use my login that has the capacity backed by it. And now I have essentially established a live connection. You can see all my models here. I have just some simple examples. In this case, let's just say I want to use that same COVID model that I had just published. I'm going to connect to it. And so we're not importing. If you remember, we have three options around connecting to data sets in Power BI. We have in memory, So that is the most common, where we actually grab the data, suck it into memory within Power BI, and the model sits within Power BI. We have direct query, which just says every time I slice something in a report, I'm going to send another query out to the data set. It's going to filter it, send me a result back. And then we have the third option, which is a live connect to an analysis services model. And it's like direct query, but because it's going to a native tabular model, it's extremely fast. So you don't get the latency of direct query. So you actually get the benefit of an in-memory type model without the latency of having direct query. And so if we were to open this up again, this is just exactly the same data that we had in that dashboard. I'm working with it. And so what's happening is this is a local Power BI instance on my local laptop connecting to a model that is published up into Power BI. And so that's a very important first step, because it's really properly decoupling the model from the actual dashboard. So when I am building Power BI dashboards with Power BI, so PBIX files, I have a model that I can now start to share throughout the organization. I can publish it up, and then anybody who has obviously access to the workspace can then tie whatever visualization tool they want and start consuming that data. So it also allows us to take tools like, if you're familiar with Tabular Editor. So Tabular Editor, which is if you're a developer that has done a lot of analysis services development work, this is just an interface that Alberto Ferrari and Marco Russo put together. That's a great kind of editor for tabular models, and I can go against that. So I can go against these Power BI models exact same way that I would go against tabular models. This is, again, that same published COVID model. Or I could use something like SQL Server SQL Server Management Studio. So if you're familiar with this, if you're DBA, or if you're familiar with kind of exploring databases this way, I'm not going to connect to a database. I'm going to connect to an analysis services instance. This is that same workspace URL that I'm going to connect with. If I connect to it, this would be the exact same way that you would be connecting to analysis services. I can open that I'm essentially opening up that workspace. And so if you see, I have an AdventureWorks, I have a COVID, and I have a sample tabular. This will essentially mirror the same thing that if I look at my workspace, so Becker demos my workspace, and I look under data sets, these are my 3 data sets that I have to work with. So these are essentially PBIX files that I published up here. And I can work with them just as if they were analysis services models. So what that means is that, I could do something as simple as run a query. Let's say I want to run a DAX query against that as if it was an analysis services model. So if I were to say evaluate COVID model, or I'll actually just do a top, and I'll take the first 10 records, COVID, hopefully this runs. So here, I'm now just exploring the data. So I'm sending a query to that model that's sitting in the Power BI service using a querying tool like SQL Server Management Studio, same tool that you'd use to query database. So super powerful that way from a developer. And that opens up all sorts of use cases around saying we can now publish models into Power BI. We can now govern them. We can now have multiple authors. We can now properly put them into some sort of source control. And what it also does is it allows us to start to do things like composite models. And again, Reza talked about composite models in the sense that I can have a single model and multiple dashboards on top of it. But what we have coming and was going to be released this month, and I believe it's going to be pushed back a couple months, is now the ability to say, I want to take an enterprise model that someone has published up into Power BI as my starting point. And then I want to open that model up And I want to add a whole bunch of extra tables and measures and calculations and things that I'm interested in, that I want to work with. And then I want to save that, or then I want to publish that up. And so my composite model is comprised of maybe 90% or 80% of this published, governed enterprise model that's sitting there, and then just a bunch of extra stuff that I thought was interesting. And this was doable in the past, but what we'd have to do is have multiple instances and multiple copies of this, or I'd have to download the enterprise model and then I'd make changes and then I'd push that back up. But what happened was if someone made updates to this enterprise model, I didn't get those updates because unless I'm keeping that synced or refreshed, there was issues. So it opens up a ton of opportunities for people who are, let's say, power users or business analysts that are familiar with Power BI or comfortable in building models, but want something to start with. They want a nice governed model to start with to give them 90%, and then they just want to start augmenting it, adding stuff to it. So again, this was originally slated, you'll see on our website, this is slated for April. I believe these are going to be pushed back to September to be available, to be determined, but either way, super exciting, and it really closes some of those gaps that we had around use cases of, you know, governed business intelligence world and self-service visualization world coming together. So a few of the other really interesting things that I found: incremental refresh. I believe the last Power BI user group we had, or maybe it was a couple ago, we had a presentation on the incremental refresh. So that's now readily available. Really relevant in the sense that now we can take very large models, develop them locally on my laptop, right? So let's take a massive data set. I don't want to pull all that data locally into my laptop. I just want to take a subset of that data to build out my model. And then I want to actually just publish that up to the service, and then let the service suck up all that data. And so that lets me actually use Power BI as a true development workbench for building models. Because in the past, once you got too much data, you kind of outgrew using Power BI locally. You had to start using analysis services, and there were some other workarounds. With the incremental refresh now, you have the ability to just pull in a subset of the data, model it up, publish it, suck in the larger model, and start working with it. And so some of those use cases, and what I might show in subsequent sessions, is we have some really good use cases around the, you know, trillion plus rows of data being developed, published, and worked on through Power BI, which is awesome to see. Automatic refresh. I love this. It's so simple. And where I really would have liked to see this in the past is when I used to build large reader boards for organizations. So things like contact centers, you'd come in, you'd get a big reader board, and you want that data pretty live. And you can always have streaming dashboards and streaming reports, but it doesn't have to be live in the sense that that data is constantly being pushed. It's more of, hey, every few seconds, can I update this dashboard? And without having to click refresh, without having to have any kind of automated process that's hitting refresh on that. And so now we can automate that refresh for direct query models. So that's a model that is intended to go back against the source data, pull that data back out, and reflect that on the dashboard. We can do it based on time. So we can go down to, I think it's a couple minutes to have that automatically refreshed. Or it may be off of change data. So we may say, hey, every time new data comes in, refresh the dashboard. And so I don't have to keep hammering a refresh. I can actually just wait for an event that kicks off based on new data getting loaded. Super slick. Exporting PDFs, images, and PowerPoint presentations using Power BI REST API. So we've had kind of the manual process of, I can go in, I can look at a dashboard, I can save as or export as something like a PDF. What we can do now is do that more programmatically. And that is to say, and very similar to what we used to do with reporting services. And that's to say, we have a bunch of dashboards, reports. Every morning, I want to scrape them, put them in a PDF, and send them out to a distribution group. And so we can now programmatically make REST API calls to Power BI to generate those PDFs, to pull them down, and then to distribute them out to an audience. So really taking some of those capabilities that have been around in reporting services for 10 plus years, and in my opinion, take some of those last use cases for needing to use some of those services like reporting services. I think it was either Jared or Reza said, you know, we have paginated report capabilities in Power BI now. So we have the report that can be visualized in Power BI. We now have the distribution capabilities. You know, less and less reasons for having to use reporting services as a standalone solution. Data lineage, so really slick. If you're not using this, for those of you that aren't using this already, I found this has come in really handy. So when I go in and I look at reports in the dashboard, or I look at data sets, traditionally you just see a big list. And so one of the challenges before, what I would always have is I built 10 reports off a data set, and I don't know which reports this data set is actually referencing. So maybe I want to delete it, or maybe I want to make an update, but I don't know which reports are going to subsequently get updated. We can actually go up to view and look at that lineage now. In my example, this is a pretty lightweight workspace that I have here, but you can start to see, we can track some of that lineage from data source into data sets, and then what reports are actually built on top of that. So really slick view to just be able to quickly look at, you know, potentially where I'm going to make impacts if I make changes to data set, or to the data sets. So Decomposition Tree is another example of where we're starting to bake AI and more intelligence into Power BI. I think it was probably 6 months ago, I did a session that kind of showcased some of the stuff that Power BI has incorporated from our AI and our data science services and capabilities. This is just another example where I can start to do drill paths that are dynamic in nature. And so that just means that if I want to drill down on something, I may have a formal structured drill path, or in this case, you can see there's a little light bulb, which means that it's making a recommended drill path based on the data that I'm seeing. So it's starting to build intelligence in to say, as I drill through, in this case, there's, you know, some financial data that I'm drilling into. I want to see where that demand was coming from. And then it's saying, I recommend you look at what products were generating that type of demand. And so it enables that kind of intelligent guided path through data, and just seamlessly. This is just part of the visualization itself. And then one for the common sense of why this just doesn't exist, or why it never existed sooner, is hierarchy slicers. So you have a slicer, whether it's a bunch of radio buttons that you click and toggle. Oftentimes there's a hierarchical nature to that data. And in the past, we would just have two slicers and they would filter each other based on what you're selecting. Really slick now just to have a simple hierarchy built out in my slicer itself. And so that as you have hierarchical structures in your data, you can have hierarchical slicers available to filter and drill through that data. And more on the back end side, there are a number of updates coming to on-premise gateways. So for those of you that are standing up gateways to enable the Power BI service to connect from our cloud service back down on-prem to on-prem data sources. In the past, you know, we've had the gateway for a long time, but from an enterprise perspective, there was always questions around what happens if that gateway fails, or how do I know if I need 2 gateways or 10 gateways? So there wasn't a lot of rigor or intelligence built into those gateways in the past. Now we've built in gateway clustering, which means we can add additional nodes to those gateways that can sit across different hardware that you have on-prem. And we can manage them. So we can see where the load's coming in. We can load balance requests across those gateways. So as you have these hybrid use cases where you still have a lot of data on-prem that you need to connect to and report off of, the gateways themselves are becoming more resilient and fault tolerant, and we can load balance them. And a lot of this, it's very easy to set up and consume, and it goes across Power BI and the Power Platform itself. And the last one I had was around visual personalization. So what I can do is and this is a common use case, is I have a couple developers that build all these dashboards for the business. They get published. The people in the field or the business users don't necessarily have access to customize those reports themselves. But they want to do things like, I want to slice it, or I want to look at this instead of a line chart, I want to look at a bar chart. They now have the ability, without having edit permissions, to customize those reports. So it's not changing any of the fundamental data or underlying data set. All it is doing is saying, based on your preference, I'm going to show you a bar chart instead of a line chart, or we're going to change the axes on this chart to show something a little more relevant. The upside of that is I don't have to custom build a whole bunch of different flavors of essentially the same report. I can build a model once, I can publish a dashboard, and I can have users customize based on what slicers they want, save those as bookmarks, and what visualizations they want based on this personalization of visualizations. So makes the developer's life, or the reporting team's life, much easier. So that's all I had on visualizations. I just wanted to do a quick, I know I've only got 1 minute left, but I wanted to do a quick just plug on Power Platform. Just because I talked a lot about Power BI here doesn't mean that there isn't a ton of super exciting stuff coming Power Platform, and I know Kent's going to dig into a little bit on the Power Platform here. But I wanted to this is an article I actually read last night, and it was really around how organizations, especially, again, I don't want to beat the COVID scenario that we're all in to death here, but how organizations were able to quickly turn around applications and visualizations and pull data together very quickly. And they did it through codeless or code-free platforms like Power Platform. Being able to turn around an application, an integrated data set, and a bunch of visualizations, in some cases 24 to 48 hours, you don't get that flexibility with traditional heavy code intensive platforms. So really cool plug for kind of a number of these platforms that are being built out. Again, I won't go into it, but we have the Power Apps update themselves. And my last thing is just around, we have this, it's called the Crisis Communication App. For those who are in organizations where you're trying to juggle your work schedule. So for me, for example, I block off a couple hours in the afternoon to do homeschooling. So I want to make sure my team's aware that, during this time I'm off or I'm on, and it's really fluid and dynamic what's happening. And not just for this scenario, but for subsequent scenarios as well. There's a really cool crisis communication app that's free to download. You guys can customize it. And it's really built on the Power Platform and intended for running teams in very fluid, dynamic crisis type situations. So if you haven't seen that, really cool use cases. For those who want brownie points in their organizations, go download it, spin it up, and push it out in your organization and get approval, and push it out to your organization and get people using and consuming that. And on that, I will take a breather. Want everyone to stay safe and healthy. And I know